A court in Bangladesh has deferred the bail hearing of Hindu spiritual leader Chinmoy Krishnadas, arrested last week on sedition charges. This after no lawyer appeared for the priest on Tuesday. The court will now hear the bail plea on January 2nd. The arrest has been strongly criticized by Indian religious leaders and members of civil society. Protest rallies have been held in West Bengal and several other Indian states that share borders with Bangladesh. In Tripura, the criticism has taken the form of boycotts. Hotels and restaurants have decided not to accept bookings from Bangladeshi tourists. In the UK Parliament, former Home Secretary Priti Patel has expressed her deep concerns over the awful violence seen in Bangladesh. She called on the government to set out how they are engaging with the Bangladeshi government on this pressing and important issue. Take a listen.
It's also raised the arrest of the ISKCON leader, and it's a place of worship I too am very familiar with, near his constituency. But Mr. Speaker, these are deep and long-standing ties between our two countries, and the Minister herself is right to point out that even though she's visited Bangladesh recently, as my right honourable friend, the member opposite, has said, the degree of escalation in the violence is deeply, deeply concerning. And what we are witnessing now is just uncontrolled violence in many quarters. And we are now watching with horror and shock as further violence is spread in Bangladesh. We must emphasise that all efforts must be taken now. We have a religious leader who has now been arrested. We need to know effectively what is being done to secure his release, due process in particular.
Actress Nargis Fakhri's sister Alia Fakhri has been arrested in the murder probe of her ex-boyfriend and his friend in New York's Queens. Alia allegedly set a two-story garage on fire, leading to the death of Edward Jacobs and Anastasia Etinen. According to District Attorney Melinda Katz, Alia deliberately set on fire a detached garage of a house, which led to the death of a 35-year-old ex-boyfriend, Edward. The attack by a Syrian rebel group on the country's second biggest city, Aleppo, has left the US in a state of dilemma. Washington says it is not taking any position related to the recent attack, while maintaining 1,000 troops in Syria as part of the ongoing mission to fight ISIS. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan's statement to the CNN has made the situation more difficult. He said that the rebel forces attacking the Syrian regime are designated as terrorist organizations by the US. Iran has thrown its support behind Syria's government after thousands of insurgents took control of the country's second-largest city of Aleppo and seized nearby towns and villages in a swift and surprise offensive. Here's what Iran's foreign ministry said.
رژیم صهیونیستی به صورت فعال حمایت می‌کرده از گروه‌های مختلف تروریستی. هدف هم روشن هست، هدف هم تضعیف مقاومت و سوریه به عنوان یکی از محورهای اصلی مقاومت در برابر اشغالگری و هم به عنوان روشی دیرپا از سوی رژیم صهیونیستی برای ناهمسازی کل منطقه، برای ایجاد تفرقه و فتنه در بین گروه‌ها و کشورهای مختلف اسلامی است.
Western nations bracing for major political shifts are boosting their support for Ukraine. In a surprise visit to Kiev, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who is soon set to face a no-confidence vote, pledged that $680 million in military aid would arrive by the year's end. And the Biden administration, on the other hand, is also preparing to send an additional $725 million in anti-drone systems and munitions. Russia is reportedly open to discussing a Ukraine ceasefire deal with Donald Trump, but rules out making any major territorial concessions and insists Kiev must abandon its ambitions to join NATO. Moscow continues to demand, and I quote, demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, and in the previous peace negotiations said Kiev's military should be reduced to 50,000. Dozens of Lebanese mourners gathered at a temporary cemetery in Tyre to exhume the coffins of loved ones and give them a proper burial in their own hometowns. The open cemetery contained 192 bodies of Lebanese people killed by Israeli attacks on the city over the last months. The exhumation process was carried out by the Lebanese Civil Defense Department in coordination with the Health Ministry Department.
على لبنان كله على الشهداء اللي ماتت دم بالارض عشو بدكش تبكي عملوا فينا اللي ما عملوا ما حدا كان معنا ما حدا ولا دولة كانت معنا الشهداء بتبكي على الشهداء اللي ماتت اللي حاربت كرمال أرضنا.
Georgians continued their protests against the government for a fifth straight night, setting up makeshift roadblocks and launching fireworks at police. Cops used water cannons and tear gas to drive protesters away from the parliament building. Protesters have gathered near the parliament building each night since Thursday. The protest started after the ruling Georgian Dream Party declared its decision to put the EU accession talks on hold. A court in Vietnam upheld death sentences for real estate tycoon Truong My Lan. This comes after the court earlier rejected her appeal against a conviction for embezzlement and bribery in a high-profile $12 billion fraud case. Lan, the chairwoman of and a real estate developer, was sentenced to death in April for her role in what was Vietnam's biggest financial fraud case on record. The world's latest sports crowd disaster unfurled in Guinea's Nazare Kore. Chaos erupted at a soccer game after fans protested a referee's call. Thousands of panicked spectators tried to flee the stadium, leaving at least 56 people dead in the West African nation. Footage circulated widely on social media showed people running as they tried to escape the stadium, many of them jumping the high fence. Many of the dead were reportedly crushed. It was not immediately clear how much the death toll could grow. Local media outlets also reported that amid the confusion, security forces used tear gas. US President Joe Biden had long pledged he would not pardon his son Hunter, who was set to be sentenced this month for gun and tax convictions. But on Sunday, the president pardoned his son anyway. The sweeping pardon covers not only Hunter Biden's convictions in 2 cases in Delaware and California, but also any other quote-unquote offenses against the US, which he has or may have committed or taken part in. Biden is hardly the first president to deploy his pardon powers to benefit those close to him. Mark Garagos, Hunter Biden's attorney, talks about President Biden's decision to pardon his son. Take a look.
Because of pressure from House Republicans, a special counsel was illegally and unconstitutionally appointed, and they revived the case that was dead in the water and had already been passed on. I don't know how you could get more politically motivated than that. I think that when Jack Smith threw in the towel, that was all that was needed for the president to pardon Hunter.
A truck driver in a vehicle with a Polish license plate caused a series of accidents on 2 German motorways or autobahns. According to authorities, the truck driver drove in a zigzag fashion, causing many injuries. Only after a collision with oncoming traffic did the truck come to a halt. German officials said that 50 vehicles were involved in the series of accidents near the city of Neuss in North Rhine-Westphalia. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te arrived in the Marshall Islands on the latest stop of his diplomatic tour of Taiwan's Pacific allies. President Lai was welcomed at the airport by Marshall Islands President Hilda Heyn and went on to address the Marshallese Parliament. The Ministry of National Defense held a news conference to address China's growing military presence around the Taiwan Strait. Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli has arrived in Beijing for a 4-day official visit to China. PM Oli was invited by Chinese Premier Li Qiang. They will hold bilateral talks and discuss matters of mutual interest. PM Oli is also scheduled to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping and Zhao Leji, chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress of China. The Prime Minister will address a gathering at the Peking University and also speak at the Nepal-China Business Forum. Hundreds of people gathered in Nepal's capital for a rally to mark the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. They rallied in Kathmandu, holding cards demanding greater rights for those living with disabilities. They are demanding better access in the streets, education and employment opportunities. There are very limited facilities in Nepal for people with disabilities and hardly any designated paths for wheelchair access in most streets and buildings.
धेरै अपङ्गहरू भएको छन् राम्रोसँग रोजगारी पाएको छैन सबैलाई राम्रो व्यवहार चाहियो कहिले हेर्नु कहिले के गर्नुहुन्छ त्यसो लाग्यो
Protesters gathered outside the top UN court calling for climate justice as a landmark climate change case opened on Monday. The International Court of Justice took up the largest case in its history, hearing the plight of small island nations helpless in combating the impact of climate change they feel endangers their very survival. The nations demand that major polluting countries be held accountable. Take a look.
One of the two questions that have been taken to court includes historical responsibilities, and that includes reparations. There will be countries who will be putting forth their cases, especially in the Pacific, about historical responsibilities in terms of reparations and payments of countries that have actually caused the climate crisis in the developed world. And for us Pacific Islanders, we also need the finances that is required to adapt, mitigate, and also counter the losses and damages that we incur due to the climate crisis.
Spain will allow workers up to 4 days of paid leaves to help them avoid traveling during climate emergencies. Employers were criticized for making staff work despite an alert sent out ahead of the October floods that killed at least 224 people. The new measure dictates that if the government declares an emergency, workers must refrain from going to work. US travelers battled harsh weather to get to home after Thanksgiving. Residents of the Great Lakes region saw additional snow and faced the prospect of even more buildups this week. Lake effect snow continued to fall on parts of western New York that were already blanketed with a foot or more over the past 4 days. Lake effect snow warnings were issued in parts of Ohio, New York, and Pennsylvania. The Nasdaq and S&P 500 closed at record highs on Monday. The fresh highs were boosted by tech-related shares after the market posted a strong November. Investors now await the week's economic data, including the key monthly jobs report. A Delaware judge ruled on Monday that Tesla CEO Elon Musk still is not entitled to receiving a whopping $56 billion compensation package. This comes despite shareholders of the electric vehicle company voting in June to reinstate the package. The ruling by the judge follows a January decision that called the pay package excessive and blocked it. In a post on social media platform X after the decision, Musk said that shareholders should control company votes, not judges. Tesla, in another statement on X, said, "The ruling is wrong and we are going to appeal," adding that the judge had overruled a supermajority of shareholders. President-elect Donald Trump has publicly opposed Japan's Nippon Steel purchasing U.S. steel for $15 billion. In a post on Truth Social, Trump said tax incentives and tariffs will be levied to revive U.S. steel and prevent it from being bought by a foreign company. Bloomberg News has reported that US oil major ExxonMobil is weighing a sale of its petrol stations in Singapore, a deal that could raise about $1 billion. Exxon operates 59 petrol stations in Singapore under its Esso brand. The report said that a sale would allow Exxon to raise cash to deploy in other regions of higher growth potential, adding that players in the energy industry and investment funds had shown preliminary interest in the disposal. US manufacturing contracted at a moderate pace in November, with orders growing for the first time in 8 months and factories facing exceptionally lower prices for inputs. India's Space Research Organisation is set to witness yet another watershed moment in the history of astronomy. Sriharikota's Satish Dhawan Space Centre will be used to launch the European Space Agency's PROBA-3 mission on Wednesday. The mission is aimed at creating an artificial solar eclipse with the help of satellites flying in close formation. This will help scientists study the outermost layer of Sun's atmosphere, the corona. In a new lawsuit, Apple has been accused of illegally monitoring its employees' devices and iCloud accounts while also barring them from discussing their pay and working conditions. The complaint was filed in a California state court by Amar Bhakta, who works in digital advertising for the iPhone giant. Now, Bhakta claims Apple requires employees to install software on personal devices that they use for work, allowing the company to access their email, photos, libraries, health, and smart home data and other personal information. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger has been forced out less than 4 years after taking the helm of the company. Gelsinger resigned on the 1st of December after a board meeting last week. The board of directors reportedly felt Gelsinger's plan to turn Intel around was not working and the progress was slow. According to the reports, the Intel board gave Gelsinger 2 options. Either he could retire or be removed. Pat Gelsinger chose to step down. The United States has launched its 3rd big crackdown in as many years on China's semiconductor industry, curbing exports to 140 companies, including chip equipment maker Nora Technology Group. Qingdao Port, a subsidiary of the Shandong Port Group, has set a world record for the 11th time for its automated container terminal efficiency. The port recorded an average productivity of 60.6 20-foot equivalent units per hour in a loading task. Now, this is the 2nd time this year that the Qingdao Port automated terminal of Shandong Port Group has set a new world record. China successfully sent a new satellite for communication technology into space. The satellite was launched from the Zhejiang Satellite Launch Center in Sichuan province on Tuesday. It was launched by a Long March 3B carrier launcher rocket and has entered the planned orbit. The satellite will be used for communication, radio, television, data transmission, and other services. It will also carry out tests related to technology. The launch marked the 549th mission of Long March series carrier rockets.